In the absence of that, just with Minnesota, one has to wonder if PJ Fleck is a spent force in Big Ten coaching, not necessarily college football coaching, but Big Ten coaching. Because when you blow a big fourth quarter lead to Northwestern, and I know that Northwestern did overachieve last year, but like that Northwestern team, which did overachieve, did not have high-end talent. And like if you're Minnesota, you have no business blowing a multi-possession, multi-touchdown lead late against Northwestern. And so with those kinds of things happening under PJ Fleck, like early in his tenure, we were wondering if Fleck was getting Minnesota closer to a Rose Bowl standard. He did come fairly close earlier on the job in Minneapolis, but he missed his chance. He couldn't beat Wisconsin at home late in the season when Paul Chryst was still coaching the Badgers. And, at Minnesota, you don't get that many bites at the apple. Those kinds of opportunities, they don't come around regularly. They did under Bernie Bierman and Murray Warmath, but not today in the 21st century. So he had his chance, he missed, and a similar chance has not come along. And you just have to wonder if everything's gotten stale. And one of the big red light, 5-alarm fires for PJ Fleck at Minnesota is that, when you remember, he took Western Michigan to a New Year's Six bowl game, and he did that with a really good passing attack. What's the thing that PJ Fleck hasn't been able to formulate at Minnesota? A passing attack. The passing offense has been not just average, it's been dreadful. He's actually done a really good job of developing running backs, but the passing game has just utterly deserted him. It's utterly eluded Fleck at Minnesota. That has been the really big puzzler, the really big head scratcher for Fleck. And so, when you consider USC's matchup against Minnesota, it's hard to feel especially concerned or especially worried from a Trojan vantage point, just because, where does Minnesota's offense hurt USC's defense? What's going to be the thing in that matchup that Minnesota can look to and say, aha, this is where we can really exploit USC. Minnesota is one of a few teams on this schedule where you're thinking, how does Minnesota score? How does this USC opponent score? And I know after 2 years of Alex Grinch, that might seem weird to think about, but we know that this year the defensive coaching is going to be better at USC. And I'm looking at Minnesota and I'm just wondering, where do the Gophers find enough points to make that game, really close in the fourth quarter, let alone win? And so that's really part of the PJ Fleck story right now. It's just how stale Minnesota's been and how limited the Gophers' passing attack has been. And unless or until we see real proof that the passing game has actually been beefed up, that there's actually some vertical potency to go along with a smash mouth running game, until that emerges, it's hard to take Minnesota overly seriously.
Tim, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to say, and as Matt, you and I have talked about on both shows, the strength of this team is probably going to be the secondary. I just really do think it's for USC. So that just exacerbates, if you're going to come in with just a mediocre passing game, where USC, I think, is most susceptible to be beaten this year is two ways. One, a dominant offensive line that's going to wear down our defensive line, or just a superior passing attack, meaning you have an elite quarterback with elite receivers that can maybe try to pick apart the secondary. But USC, in a lot of ways, if you're going to try to run at us, I think that they are going to put a lot of guys up in the box, challenge you man to man. If you don't have the quarterback and the receivers to make them pay for that, it might be a long day for your offense.
So Tim teased us with a graphic that I would love to see him take off on, because I know that he's got a gripe about it, but I will take off on Minnesota first just to clear the conversation, since we brought up the Golden Gophers. So my thoughts is that I'm a PJ Fleck guy. He did do a nice job for 3 seasons there at Minnesota, as Matt alluded to, 11-2, 9-4, 9-4. His last 3 regulars or full seasons before last season. And this is a team that if Vegas gets it right, if Vegas is right about Minnesota, they're going to have a dreadful season. And they were only 5-7 last year before a bowl win against a MAC team. So they went 6-7. Their win totals like 4.5 according to Vegas. They're supposed to have a bad season. Max Brosmer is an incoming transfer quarterback from New Hampshire. So he lit it up in the FCS, but we don't know how that is going to transfer. We do know that Ethan Kalkumanis, their previous quarterback, transferred to Rutgers and took over the starting job there. But they did have the aberration of a season, not just in the win column, Matt, but that 2019 team that you allude to that lost on the final day of the season to Wisconsin that could have went to the Rose Bowl because Ohio State won the Big Ten but went to the playoff. That was the team that could throw it, and that's why they were so much better. Tanner Morgan had a 30-6 TD to pick ratio, which was one of the best figures in the nation. They had Tyler Johnson. They had Audman Bell at wide receiver. They had a dynamic offense for them and a truly good offense, balanced offense. But since then, there's a stat out there that Minnesota, since that 2019 team, has thrown the ball less than any team in the nation that is not a military academy for 4 seasons. They have just buttoned it down and they just run it and rely on the defense. And that's how they play football. And that's generally worked in the Big Ten Western Division, but that's not going to work overall.
It has to be jarring for the people in Minneapolis to watch, Kirk Cousins throw the ball 55 times a game and then have PJ Fleck just going, pure Cro-Magnon Neanderthal caveman on Saturdays. I mean, that is football whiplash from Saturday to Sunday.
Absolutely. And one of their big reasons why they were successful is PJ Fleck's first season, they were headed toward a bad season. And he picked up Joe Rossi, who took over his defense late in the year, and he's been exceptional. Well, he left for Michigan State this offseason. So they have some big shoes to fill on the defensive side, too. And one of the best players in the Big Ten, Tyler Nubin, their All-America safety, is off to the NFL.
Mark, you follow the Big Ten closely, of course. Let me ask you something. What's your view of all these rotating Big Ten coordinators? Because you had Kirk Ciarrocca being under Fleck, and then he left and he went to Penn State, and there's been a shuffling of coordinators involving Minnesota, Penn State, Rutgers, other schools, maybe. Like it's kind of amazing how many coordinator changes and exchanges there have been within the Big Ten over the past several years. So, like, what are you making of this? It does seem a little bit aberrational to have this many coordinator changes within a conference. It's been a little bit conspicuous from where I sit.
Well, I have to think that they're taking a page out of the Matt Zemek textbook for structuring a coaching staff, thinking, hey, we need somebody from inside the conference that knows these opponents, that knows how we play football in this conference. And that gives the familiarity, and then also just the application of this guy, I'm comfortable with him because I know what he's schemed against me. I know what I've seen on tape year after year after year at these various stops. So I want him on my side now.
I think it's interesting that these coordinators, though, are willing to make these changes. Coaching against a former opponent. For some people it's easy, for others not so much. But certainly for several Big Ten coordinators, they're not sweating it.
Okay, Tim.
One more thing. I was counting out the 4.5 wins, and the good news for them is they have Iowa at home, USC at home, and Penn State at home. 3 of them were difficult games. But
Person in
anyway.
the chat made the point. Person in the chat made the point, and it's a good one, that Minnesota is going to be playing USC the week after going to Ann Arbor. So that's something that does work in favor of USC. And I know that USC is playing this Minnesota game between the Wisconsin and Penn State home game. So that makes it a trap game for USC. But the fact that Minnesota is coming off the Michigan game, that makes this game just a little bit less of a potential pothole for USC. So that's good to know.